Deep in the Tennessee mountains where the pine forests swallow sound and the logging roads end without warning, something is burning, smoke, thin, rising from a place that should have been empty for years. A small house, gray timber, a sagging roof, a garden where straight rows still hold their shape beneath the weeds the way order holds beneath neglect when someone once cared enough to make it permanent. And on the porch steps, a golden dog, sitting still, waiting. Inside a boy, 16 years old, hands that know how to work, eyes that have learned recently and painfully not to expect anyone to show up. He's found something buried in the corner of the garden, a tin box, locked, his name on the outside in his dead father's handwriting. He doesn't have the key, but somewhere in this forest, someone has been waiting 34 years to find him. Part 1. The road into the pines. The door closed so quietly it almost didn't happen. No slam, no argument, no last look back. Just the soft final click of a latch catching and then nothing. 4 wooden steps, a dirt path, an October air cold enough to mean it. Eli Harper stood on that path for a long moment. 16 years old, a green canvas backpack on his shoulders that had once belonged to his father, a folding knife clipped to his belt loop, small bone handled, the kind a man gives a boy when he wants him to remember something without saying it out loud. And beside him, pressed warm and solid against his left leg, a golden dog the color of autumn wheat. Copper didn't move either. He just sat there with his big square head tilted slightly, watching the closed door, the way dogs watch things they don't fully understand but take seriously anyway. Eli looked at the door too. He'd been doing that a lot lately, standing in front of things that were finished, trying to figure out when exactly they had ended. His father's hospital room, the funeral home, the kitchen table where his uncle had slid a piece of paper across the laminate and said, "Sign this. It's just an inventory." He hadn't signed it. Maybe that was why they were standing here now. Darnell Harper was not a large man, but he had a way of filling a room that had nothing to do with size. It was something in the jaw, the stillness he got when he'd already decided something and was only now informing you of it. He'd shown up 3 weeks after the funeral wearing a jacket Eli had never seen before. Tan canvas, too new, the kind of thing you bought when you were celebrating something you hadn't told anyone about yet. He'd walked through James Harper's house with the careful, unhurried step of a man doing inventory, touching the backs of chairs, opening cabinets, standing in doorways a beat too long. "Place needs to be dealt with," he said. Eli had been sitting at the kitchen table eating cereal. Copper was under the table with his chin on Eli's foot. Neither of them moved. The estate has to go through probate. That takes time. You can't just live here, Eli. That's not how this works. Dad left the house to me. Your dad left a lot of things, a lot of ways, and most of it needs to get sorted by a lawyer before any of it means anything. Silence. Copper shifted under the table. "I'm not your enemy," Darnell said, and he almost sounded like he believed it. "I'm trying to do the right thing here. You're 16. I need to stay in my house." The jaw again, that stillness. "I'll give you 3 weeks," he said finally. "Get your things together. 3 weeks." Eli spent them doing exactly what his father had taught him. He chopped wood and stacked it on the porch. He cleaned the gutters. He checked the furnace filter and replaced it with one from the hardware store, paying with the last of the cash his father had kept in the kitchen drawer, the emergency money folded under a rubber band with a note that just said groceries in handwriting, so familiar it hurt to look at. He wasn't planning to leave. He was planning to stay. But on the morning of day 22, Darnell arrived with a locksmith, not a lawyer, not a police officer, a locksmith. And something in that, the casualness of it, the sheer practical confidence that this was already decided, knocked something loose in Eli's chest, like a shelf coming off a wall, everything on it sliding at once. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He went to his room, loaded the green canvas backpack with what he could carry, 2 flannel shirts, wool socks, his father's old compass, the bone-handled knife, a box of waterproof, matches the photograph from the nightstand, and he came back downstairs. Copper was waiting by the front door, already there, already knowing. "You got somewhere to go?" Darnell asked. Eli looked at him for a moment, really looked, tried to find something in his uncle's face that resembled the man his father had grown up alongside, some trace of shared history, some flicker of doubt. Nothing. "Yeah," Eli said, and it was almost true. The town of Kellam, Tennessee sits at the edge of a long valley where the Cumberland Plateau drops off toward the east, the kind of town that looks like it's been waiting for something to happen since 1978 and has mostly made peace with the waiting. 3 churches, a Dollar General, a diner where the coffee was always just slightly too hot or just slightly too cold, nothing in between. Eli had grown up here, which meant he knew every road out of it. He walked south, not because south meant anything specific, because south was the direction of the old logging roads, and the logging roads led into the pine forest that ran along the ridge behind town, the same forest his father had taken him into every September for as long as he could remember, to check deer signs, to learn how to read a tree line, to sit in the early morning quiet, and as James Harper used to say, let the world remember, you're not in charge of it. Eli had been 7 the first time, 12 the last, 4 years ago. He hadn't known then that it was the last time. You never do. October in that part of Tennessee has a quality that people who haven't experienced it don't quite believe when you describe it. The cold comes in low and fast, running along the ground before the air temperature catches up. Your feet feel it first, then your hands. By the time your face knows what's happening, you're already inside it. Eli walked for 2 hours before he admitted to himself that he had no plan. He'd had something that felt like a plan when he was standing in the kitchen watching Darnell talk to the locksmith. A direction, a sense that the forest his father loved was a reasonable place to go when there was nowhere else. But reasonable and planned are different things. Copper walked ahead of him on the logging road, unhurried nose sweeping side to side in that steady rhythm that meant he was reading the ground. He was good at that. James Harper had noticed it early. That dog knows things before they happen, he used to say, watching Copper alert on something invisible in the tree line. Pay attention to him. Eli paid attention. It was one of the few instructions he'd followed perfectly. The logging road dissolved at the 2-mile mark. That was normal, most of them did, eventually swallowed back into pine needle and root. Eli kept the compass out, tracking southeast using the tree line the way his father had taught him. Sun in the west, shadows pointing east. You're not as lost as you feel. The forest deepened. The temperature dropped another 4 degrees. He felt it in his knuckles first, then his wrists. Copper was moving differently now, not the sweeping read-the-ground pace, something more focused, more deliberate, like he'd picked up a thread and was following it. Eli followed him. That was the arrangement. Had been since Copper was 8 months old and had led James straight to a busted water pipe under the back porch that neither of them had known about. James had laughed so hard he'd had to sit down in the mud. "All right," he said, still laughing. "All right, I get it. You're in charge." So Eli followed the dog, through a stand of old hemlocks, down a slope wet with recent rain, across a narrow creek barely a step wide, and up the other side through a wall of wild rhododendron that grabbed at his jacket and let go only reluctantly. And then the trees thinned, and there it was. Later, Eli would try to remember his exact first thought when he saw it. He couldn't, because the truth was, his mind went quiet, the way it goes quiet sometimes when something is too much to immediately categorize, too much to rush through. A small house, not large, maybe 400 square feet, maybe less, built from timber that had gone gray with weather, but hadn't rotted through, a porch with 2 missing boards, a roof that sagged significantly on the left side but hadn't collapsed, 1 window on the south face glass intact, 1 window on the north side broken, patched from the inside with what looked like flattened tin cans. Wild vines had worked their way up the right exterior wall. Virginia creeper mostly gone rust red with the season. It looked from a certain angle like the forest was wearing the house as an ornament, like it had grown around it and decided to keep it. And in front of the house, that was the thing that stopped him completely. A garden, or what had been a garden. The weeds were high, thigh-high in some places, and the blackberry canes had crept in from the east. But underneath all of it, if you knew how to look, and Eli did, because James Harper had taught him, the rows were still there. Straight lines cut into the earth with the kind of care that doesn't disappear just because a place gets forgotten. Someone had worked this ground seriously. Someone had built this soil over years. Copper walked straight to the porch steps and sat down. Done. Found it. Here. Eli stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. He was doing the math his father had taught him to do before entering any unknown structure. Roof load, foundation settling, windows, exits. He was being careful. He was also, and he would not say this out loud to anyone terrified, not of the house, of hoping, because hope had been a dangerous thing lately. He'd hoped the inventory paper wasn't what it looked like. He'd hoped Darnell would come through. He'd hoped on some level he was only now admitting that someone would show up and handle this. A teacher, a neighbor, a relative he didn't know existed. Nobody showed up, which meant that hoping cost something, and he wasn't sure he had enough left to spend. But Copper was sitting on the porch steps, and Eli trusted the dog. So he crossed the clearing, climbed the 3 remaining porch steps, carefully testing each one, and pushed the door open with his shoulder. Cold air came out first, the cold of a space that hasn't been heated in a long time, damp and close and still, like opening a book that's been shut for years. Then the smell of it, old wood, ash, pine resin, and underneath all that so faint it was almost imaginary, something like machine oil and cedar, a working man's smell, a specific working man's smell. Eli's breath caught. He knew that smell. He'd grown up inside it. He stepped through the door. 1 room, a narrow kitchen space at the back, a hand pump over a basin, shelves above it, an iron wood stove in the center, squat and serious looking, the kind that's been doing its job since before anyone alive can remember. 2 windows, a sleeping loft, accessible by a ladder nailed to the left wall. Under the loft, 2 wooden crates, a folded wool blanket on a chair, a rusted lantern hanging from a nail. Eli walked to the wood stove, ran his hand across the iron top. Cold, but not damaged. The grate inside was clear of ash. Someone had cleaned it out, years ago probably, but cleaned out carefully, the way you clean something you expect to use again. He looked up, and that was when he saw it. On the crossbeam above the doorway, not painted, not labeled, not meant to be a sign for anyone who wasn't looking for it, just carved into the wood itself, the kind of carving a man does with a good knife and unhurried hands. Capital letters, 2 of them, and a number, J.H. 1987, James Harper, 1987. Eli's parents had married in 1994. He hadn't been born until 2008. This house had existed for 21 years before he drew his first breath. He stood under those letters for a long time, not thinking exactly, just standing, just understanding slowly that Copper had not led him to a random abandoned structure in the middle of a Tennessee pine forest. Copper had led him home. He built the fire slowly, methodically, the way his father had shown him small, dry material, first pencil diameter sticks, then finger diameter, then wrist. Never rushed the first fire in a cold stove, never skipped steps. He found kindling in a box beside the stove, dry, clearly sheltered from the weather, as if whoever had left it had expected someone to need it eventually. He found matches in a tin on the shelf above the basin, struck the first one. It caught. And the stove, that old iron stove that had been cold and dark and waiting, came back to life the way stoves do when they're ready, without fuss, without drama, just heat spreading quietly from the center of the room outward. Copper came inside and lay down 4 feet from the stove, front paws extended, chin on the floor, watching the fire with the deeply satisfied expression of a dog who has accomplished something important and knows it. Eli sat on the floor beside him. He ate the last of the food from his packed crackers, a tin of sardines, 3 dried apricots. He drank from his water bottle and promised himself he'd find the water source tomorrow. Outside, through the intact south window, the pine forest went dark slowly, the blue-gray of October dusk in the mountain's light, pulling back through the trees like a tide going out. He was alone. He was inside. The fire was burning. It wasn't enough. And it was for tonight exactly enough. He dreamed about his father. Not an unusual dream, not some message or visitation, nothing cinematic. Just James Harper, at the kitchen table drinking coffee, reading a folded newspaper, the way he always had glasses pushed too far down his nose. The ordinary presence of him, the weight of a person in a room, the specific gravity of someone who belongs somewhere. Eli woke at first gray light. Copper was already at the door waiting. Morning changed everything. Light came through the south window in a long rectangle that moved slowly across the floor as the sun rose. Dust hung in it, suspended. The stove had gone out during the night, but the room held some warmth, not much but some. Eli rekindled the fire before doing anything else, fed it, let it settle. Then he went to work. First, water. He followed the sound of it, thin under the wind, easy to miss if you weren't listening, right around the north side of the house and 15 feet into the tree line, where a narrow spring surfaced from between 2 flat rocks and ran south toward the larger creek. Cold, clear, constant. He drank from his cupped hands and understood again that his father had chosen this place carefully, not stumbled onto it, chosen it, every detail of it. Second, the garden. He walked its rows, slowly pulling weeds aside with his hands to read the soil underneath. Dark, still workable probably if turned before the ground froze. Someone had amended this soil deliberately. He could feel the texture of it, the way good garden earth has a give to it that raw clay doesn't. Whoever had worked here had built this ground over years of deliberate effort. Third, the perimeter. He walked the fence line, old split rail, sagging in places, collapsed in 2 spots, but mostly intact. Beyond the east fence, a slope down toward the creek, hardwood trees giving way to scrub. Beyond the south fence, open ground remnants of what might once have been a small clearing. Beyond the west fence, deeper pine forest, dark and dense and old. Beyond the north fence, he almost missed it, because the apple trees started gradually. A single one at first just outside the fence line, its trunk bent at an angle from years of prevailing wind. Then 3 more. Then, as the slope dipped into a natural bowl, 40 yards from the house, a whole row of them. A dozen trees, at least old, and unpruned branches going every direction, but still carrying fruit. Small apples, red going to purple, October ripe. Eli picked until his jacket pockets were full. He stood in that forgotten orchard and looked back up the slope toward the gray roof of the house visible through the pines. Smoke from the chimney thin and straight in the windless morning air. It looked from here like a place someone lived. He hadn't expected that. He was coming back over the fence, apples in his jacket, when Copper suddenly stopped, stood very still, nose up. Then he turned and walked with that focused, deliberate pace toward the back corner of the garden, the northeast corner near the old stone foundation wall where the original garden edge met the tree line. Eli followed. Copper sat down in front of a section of ground that looked at first exactly like the rest of it, weeds, leaves, October dark soil. Then Eli saw the corner of something, dark cloth, or what had been cloth now stiff, somewhere between fabric and leather, the way material gets when it's been buried in soil for a long time. He crouched down and worked it loose carefully. A small package, maybe 8 inches by 5, wrapped in waxed canvas, the old-fashioned kind, tied with braided cord. He turned it over. The waxed canvas was dark with age, but on one face of it, written in pen that had bled slightly into the fibers, still legible, still readable, still without any question, his father's handwriting. For Eli, not yet. Dad. Eli sat in the cold northeast corner of that old garden for a long time, the package in his lap, Copper beside him pressed close. He turned it over twice, felt the weight of it, not heavy, maybe half a pound, the density of paper, and something solid underneath. He worked at the cord. It came loose. The wax canvas unfolded. Inside the canvas wrapped a small tin box, 4 inches by 3, hinged, old, a little rust along the seam, but structurally solid, and locked. A small brass padlock, the old pin tumbler style, no key anywhere. Eli sat with the locked tin box in his hands and felt something complicated move through him, something that was partly frustration and he would not fully admit this for another 2 days' relief, because the box existed, because his father had put something in it and written his name on the outside and buried it in a garden attached to a house built 21 years before Eli was born, which meant his father had known something, had planned something, had in whatever limited way a dying man can arrange the world for the people he's leaving behind, tried to take care of him. Not yet. That was what the outside said. Not never. Not don't open this. Just not yet. Which meant when it was time, he would know. That night, Eli built the fire higher than the night before. He roasted 2 of the apples on a flat stone near the stove the way James had taught him to do on camping trips, waited until the skin split and the inside went soft and sweet, ate them carefully, gave Copper the cores. He set the tin box on the shelf above the kitchen basin where he could see it from anywhere in the room. Then he sat on the floor with his back against the warm iron of the stove and watched the fire through the great door and tried to understand what he knew. His father had built this house in 1987, before his mother, before town, before any of the life Eli had known. His father had bought this land, how from whom, with what money he didn't know yet, and built a house in the middle of a Tennessee pine forest and kept it, tended it, or at least visited it, long enough that the garden soil was still good, long enough that there had once been fresh firewood in that box. And then at some point, maybe years ago, maybe recently, he had buried a locked tin box in the northeast corner of the garden and written Eli's name on it, while Darnell Harper had been showing up in new canvas jackets and talking about probate. While Eli had been signing nothing and hoping someone would show up, he looked at the shelf. The tin box caught the firelight on one edge, dull brass of the small lock. "I don't have the key," Eli said out loud. Copper lifted his head from the floor, looked at him, then looked at the box. "I know," Eli told him. "I know." He didn't know what he meant exactly, but something in him, some low, quiet part of him that had been barely holding on since April, loosened the smallest amount, like a knot that hasn't released yet, but has started to move. The second morning, he woke to frost on the inside of the broken north window, thin, delicate, each crystal catching the gray early light like something that had no business being beautiful and was anyway. Copper was sitting at the door again, patient waiting. Eli let him out and pulled on both flannel shirts before checking the stove. Still a few coals. He fed them kindling and watched the fire come back, and while it caught, he thought about the day ahead. The roof needed attention. That left side sag was going to be a problem before the first real snow. He'd need timber to support it from inside or pull boards from somewhere to patch the exterior. The old collapsed shed he'd spotted east of the fence line might have usable material. The window needed something better than tin cans. He needed to inventory the cellar. There was a door in the floor near the kitchen basin that he hadn't opened yet, deliberately wanting daylight before he did. And there was the matter of the perimeter, the footprints he'd found near the south fence. Human, adult, not old, maybe 2 days, maybe 3. Someone else knew about this place, or was at least nearby. He added that to the list and didn't panic about it. His father's voice from somewhere, information first, then decisions. Don't run ahead of what you actually know. He ate the last of the crackers, drank cold spring water from a tin cup he'd found on the shelf. Then he opened the cellar door. Stone walls, wooden shelves, cold air rising like an exhale from deep in the earth. He climbed down 7 rungs and let his eyes adjust. Most of the shelves were empty dust and a few rusted can lids, a broken jar. In the back left corner, 4 mason jars, intact, their contents dark and unidentifiable in this light. Preserves of some kind, probably too old to risk. On the floor near the base of the stairs, a coil of good rope still flexible, which surprised him. Someone had greased it at some point. And at the very back of the cellar, water, a seep from the rock face, barely a trickle, but constant, collecting in a shallow basin someone had shaped from concrete, crude but effective. The water was clear, cold enough to numb his fingers in 3 seconds flat. Eli crouched beside it and understood something. This house had everything it needed. Not comfort, not ease, not the things that make life pleasant, but the things that make it possible. Water, shelter, firewood, a garden that could be made to grow again, an orchard already producing. His father hadn't built a vacation cabin. He'd built a place where someone could survive, where Eli could survive. He climbed back out and stood in the kitchen and looked at the tin box on the shelf. Not yet. He nodded once to nobody. Okay, he thought, not yet. He spent the afternoon on the roof, pulled boards from the collapsed shed, most of them rotten, but 3 usable, and climbed up using the fence rail as a ladder brace. Copper sat below and watched with the expression dogs have when they disapprove of something, but understand they have no jurisdiction over it. The left side of the roof had 2 split shingles and one place where a rafter had partially given way, letting the whole section sag. He couldn't fix the rafter from outside, but he could brace it from inside and cover the gap in the shingles with tin salvaged from the can patches on the broken window. He worked until the light got too thin to trust, came down, built the fire, made soup from dried beans he'd found in a tin inside the kitchen shelf, plain, no seasoning but hot. Split it with Copper, who ate without complaint, sat down on the floor, and for the first time since the door had closed behind him 3 days ago, he didn't feel like he was falling. He felt like he was somewhere, not home, not yet, but somewhere real. The 3rd morning he heard a sound he hadn't heard since he'd arrived, a voice. It came from the direction of the east fence, not loud, not frightened, just, "You're going to break your neck on that roof." Matter of fact, like a person continuing a conversation that had already been going on for some time. Eli came off the porch in 3 steps and rounded the corner of the house and stopped at the east fence line, leaning her forearms on the top rail with the casual confidence of someone who has leaned on fences her entire life. Was an older woman, 70s probably, rubber barn boots caked with mud, a canvas jacket, the color of old leaves, a wool cap pulled low, white hair visible at the temples, eyes the gray-green of creek water in winter. She was looking at Eli the way a person looks at something they've been expecting to arrive for a long time, not surprised, just waiting to see how it had turned out. Copper was sitting 3 feet from the fence tail, moving in a slow, steady wag. Not alarmed, Eli noted. Recognized. The woman looked at Copper, then back at Eli, and something moved across her face, Not grief exactly, more like the expression of a person who has just completed a very long calculation and arrived at an answer they already knew. "You've got your daddy's hands," she said. She wasn't looking at his hands. She was looking at his face, and her voice, that steady, plain Appalachian voice, the kind that carries weather in it, had the texture of someone saying something true, not performing truth, just delivering it. Eli stood at the corner of the house, 16 years old, green canvas backpack inside, father's knife at his belt, father's dog beside him, father's house behind him. And for the first time since April, since the hospital, since the funeral, since the kitchen table and the inventory form and the quiet click of the latch, he didn't feel like he needed to explain himself. "I'm Eli," he said. The woman nodded once. "I know," she said. "I'm Willa Pruitt, and I've got some things that belong to you." Part 2, Roots in Frozen Ground. Willa Pruitt did not come through the gate. She stayed on her side of the fence, arms on the top rail, chin slightly lifted, the posture of a woman who has learned over 7 decades of living exactly how much space she is entitled to take up in any given situation, which was exactly as much as she wanted, and right now she wanted the fence between them. Eli understood that, respected it even. 2 strangers in a forest, one of them 16 and holding a locked tin box he couldn't open, the other one 71 and apparently holding answers he didn't have yet. Fair enough. "How'd you know my father?" he asked. Willa looked at him steadily. "How much time you got?" "I'm not going anywhere." "No," she said. "I don't expect you are." She pushed off the fence rail, straightened, looked at the house behind him, the patched roof, the smoke from the chimney, the fresh boot prints in the mud around the porch. "You fixed the left side," she said. "Braced it from inside. Still need to address the rafter properly." "Your daddy said the same thing about that rafter for 6 years. Eli went very still. "He came here," he said. "Not a question." "Every September," Willa said. "Like clockwork, right up until he couldn't anymore." The wind moved through the pines above them, cold, steady. A forest in late October, not angry, just indifferent, just doing what it does, regardless of what happens underneath it. "I live a quarter-mile east," Willa said. "Been there 43 years. Your daddy and I had an arrangement. He looked after this place. I looked after certain documents." She said that last word the way people say words that carry more weight than they sound like. "Documents." Eli looked at her. "What kind of documents?" Willa Pruitt smiled, just slightly, the smile of a woman who has been waiting a very long time to have this exact conversation and is not going to rush it now that it's arrived. "Come by tomorrow," she said. "Bring the dog. I'll make coffee." And she turned and walked back into the trees, just like that, gone. Eli stood at the fence for a long moment after she disappeared. Copper sat beside him, tail still moving. "You knew her," Eli said to the dog. Copper looked up at him. "You already knew her," which meant his father had brought Copper here, which meant his father had been here recently enough that the dog remembered the smell of the place, the smell of the woman, which meant a lot of things Eli needed to sit with before he could think about them properly. He went inside, built the fire up, sat on the floor, and looked at the tin box on the shelf. "Not yet." "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay, tomorrow." He didn't sleep well that night. Not fear, not cold, the stove held fine, just the restlessness of a mind that has been handed too many pieces of something and keeps trying to arrange them into a picture before it has enough pieces to see what the picture is. His father had built this house in 1987. His father had come here every September. His father had made an arrangement with a woman named Willa Pruitt who lived a quarter-mile east. His father had buried a locked tin box in the garden with Eli's name on it, and Darnell Harper, who had shown up 3 weeks after the funeral in a new canvas jacket, talking about probate and inventory and the practical necessity of moving on, had never not once mentioned any of this. Why, that was the question that wouldn't let him sleep. Either Darnell didn't know, or Darnell knew exactly, and Eli was becoming increasingly certain which one it was. Morning came gray and low, clouds moving in from the northwest, the kind that had snow in them eventually. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He fed Copper from the last of the dry food in the pack, made a note actual food for the dog soon. Copper could hunt probably given the opportunity. Eli had already seen him tree a squirrel twice, but he wasn't going to let it come to that if he could help it. He found more beans in the cellar, dried corn too, 3 tight ears hung from a nail, old but intact. He'd have to figure out what was still edible and what wasn't, but it was something. Then he put on his jacket, clipped Copper's lead, not because the dog needed it, but because appearing at a stranger's door with an unleashed dog was, according to his father, the kind of thing that started conversations on the wrong foot, and he walked east. Willa Pruitt's house was not what he expected. He'd imagined somewhere in the back of his mind something similar to the cabin, small, weathered, forgotten. What he found was a farmhouse that had been continuously, stubbornly, lovingly maintained for decades. White clapboard siding, not bright white, the soft white of something repainted. Every few years the paint going slightly warm with age. A porch with actual furniture on it. 2 rockers, a small table between them, a coffee can with dead marigolds someone had planted in the spring and not removed yet, a barn behind it red solid, a kitchen garden that had been properly put to bed for winter, the beds covered with straw, the stakes pulled and stored. Somebody worked this place. Seriously. He knocked. Copper sat beside him, straight-backed and polite. Willa opened it before the 3rd knock. She traded the barn boots for clean ones, still had the canvas jacket, and she was holding 2 mugs of coffee, already poured like she'd timed it. Right on time, she said. Your daddy was always late. She handed him a mug. He took it. Come in or stay on the porch, she said. Either way. Porch, he said. She nodded like he'd given the correct answer. They sat in the rockers. Copper lay between them on the porch boards, which he apparently found acceptable. For a minute neither of them spoke, just coffee and cold air and the sound of the wind in the pines to the west, visible from here as a dark line along the ridge. How long were you friends? Eli asked finally. Friends, Willa said. She considered the word the way you consider something that doesn't quite fit, but is the closest available. We were neighbors. 37 years, which is different from friends and also sometimes the same thing. Did you know my mother? Met her twice. She was a good woman. Didn't love the woods the way your daddy did. That was their compromise. A pause. He kept this place separate, not secret exactly, just his. Eli wrapped both hands around the mug. Did she know about the land? I don't know what she knew, Willa said. Honest, not unkind. What I know is what James told me, and what he asked me to hold on to. Tell me, Eli said. And she did. James Harper had bought the land in the summer of 1987, 40 acres north slope of the ridge, mixed pine and hardwood, a spring-fed creek along the eastern boundary. He'd paid cash money he'd saved over 4 years of working construction crews in Knoxville before coming back to Kellam. He'd registered the deed at the county courthouse in his name alone, and then he'd built the house. Took him most of that summer. He wasn't a carpenter by trade. He was a man who'd been taught to build things correctly by a father who'd been taught the same, so it wasn't fancy. But it was sound, everything level, everything plumb, the kind of structure that doesn't draw attention to itself because there's nothing to draw attention to, it just stands. He'd met Willa that first autumn. She'd seen the smoke from the chimney and walked over to investigate, because that was what you did when you lived in the mountains, and smoke appeared somewhere unexpected. I thought maybe a hunter, she said, somebody squatting for the season, but then I saw the garden rose. That told you something. Hunters don't put in garden rows, she said. Somebody planning to stay does. They'd established their arrangement gradually. Willa kept an eye on the place during the months James couldn't get out there. James kept her woodpile restocked and fixed things when they broke because she lived alone and he was handy, and that was how neighboring worked in that part of Tennessee. And later, much later, when James had a wife and a son and a life in town that was full in all the ways that matter, he'd driven out to see Willa on a Tuesday in February and asked her to hold some paperwork. He didn't explain a lot, Willa said. James wasn't a man who explained things he didn't need to explain. He just said. She stopped. Reset. He said he had a brother who'd always wanted what other people had, and he said he needed somebody outside the family to hold on to certain things. In case. In case of what? Willa looked at him over the rim of her mug. In case of exactly what happened, she said. The wind picked up while they were talking. Copper raised his head, read the air, put it back down. Eli thought about his uncle, about the new jacket, about the word probate said, in that careful, uninflected way that meant the speaker had recently learned it from someone whose job involved knowing it. Darnell doesn't know about the land, Eli said. He knows your father owned land, Willa said. Whether he knows where it is or how much I couldn't say. But a man like that, when he starts looking, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. He'll look, Eli said. He'll look, Willa agreed. She went inside and came back with a manila envelope. Old. The clasp was the kind with the metal wings you bend back. She held it out to him across Copper's head. I've had this since 2019, she said. Your daddy brought it the February before your mother got sick. He said, and I wrote this down because I wanted to remember it exactly. She paused, reached into her jacket pocket, and produced a small index card, the lined kind, her handwriting neat and small on it. He said, if something happens to me and Eli's still young, give him this when he's ready. Not before. He'll come to you. The dog will know the way. Eli looked at the envelope, then at Copper. The dog will know the way. He planned this, Eli said quietly. He planned all of this. He hoped he wouldn't need to, Willa said gently. But yes, he planned it. Eli took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. There's a copy of the deed, Willa said. Property survey. His will, not the one your uncle will wave around. The other one, the one filed with a different attorney in Knoxville, and a sealed envelope addressed to the Harlan County Property Office. What's in the sealed one? I never opened it, Willa said, and I never asked. He walked back to the cabin with the envelope under his arm and Copper at his heel. The wind was serious now, coming from the northwest, the direction of weather. The pines on the ridge were moving in long, slow waves, the sound of it filling the valley like something breathing. He went inside, put the envelope on the shelf beside the tin box, stood in the middle of the room and looked at both of them. His father on that shelf in two forms, what could be opened and what couldn't. Yet, he worked, because that was what you did when the thing you needed to understand was larger than what you could think through. You worked. You did the next thing. You let your hands do what they knew while your mind caught up. He spent 2 full days on the roof, went back to the shed, found 2 more usable boards, replaced the split shingles with split cedar from a fallen tree at the north edge of the property. He worked from inside on the rafters, sistering a new piece alongside the failing one, driving screws instead of nails, because screws hold better in old wood. When it was done, he stood under the repaired section and pushed up on it with both hands. Solid. His father, he thought, would have approved, would have said nothing, would have just run his own hand across the joint, the same way he ran his hand across anything he wanted to evaluate, quietly, thoroughly, without performance. He cleared the garden, row by row, weed by weed, turning the soil with the old spade from the collapsed shed, working it until his back ached and his hands blistered in the same 2 spots they always did, and then toughened over. He found the last of the season's potatoes, small ones overlooked, hiding under where the biggest weeds had been, and replanted them in a shallow bed near the south fence where the soil would hold warmth longest. Probably too late in the season. Probably. But probably wasn't no. He built a rain barrel from an old metal drum he'd dragged from the shed, connected it to the roof gutter with a section of old pipe, sealed the joint with pine resin, using the pitch from a slash in a pine trunk, the way his father had showed him, once calling it cheating, with a grin that meant he approved of it. It worked. Copper disappeared on the third morning of that week. Just gone. Eli stepped out onto the porch and the dog wasn't there. Called him. Nothing. He walked the perimeter fence line, Orchard Creek, and found nothing. 12 minutes of trying not to catastrophize. And then Copper came trotting out of the east tree line, tail moving something in his mouth. He deposited it on the porch boards in front of Eli's boots. A rabbit. Clean kill. Already gone. You've been practicing, Eli said. Copper looked at him with the expression of a dog who has just solved a significant problem and would appreciate if the difficulty of that achievement were properly acknowledged. Good boy, Eli said. Copper wagged once, decisive, and walked inside. The footprints appeared on the fifth day. South fence line. 2 sets, 1 heavier boot with a thick lug sole, 1 lighter dress shoe or something similar. They'd come from the direction of the logging road, stopped at the south fence and turned back. 2 people, standing at the fence, looking at the house. Eli measured the time of the prints by the moisture in the disturbed soil. Yesterday, maybe the day before. He said nothing about it to Willa when she came by that afternoon. She'd gotten into the habit of walking over every few days, never staying long, never pushing, just checking, bringing small things. Yesterday it had been a jar of actual coffee and 4 eggs from her chickens. The day before, a piece of tarp she said she had no use for. He said nothing about the footprints, but he started sleeping lighter. It was Willa who brought the news. She came on a Thursday, unusual because she generally came Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Eli had started timing his week around this without quite realizing he was doing it. She came through the east gate this time, which she'd never done before, and she was walking faster than her usual unhurried pace. Copper met her at the gate. Eli came off the porch. Darnell was in town yesterday, she said. No preamble. At the county assessor's office, asking about property registered to your father. Eli went very still. Did they tell him? They told him there were records, but that an inquiry was already open, which, Willa paused. There isn't. But Margaret at the front desk is a practical woman, and she called me last night because she remembered James and wanted me to know. So he knows there's land. He suspects. He doesn't have the location yet. The deed is recorded, but indexed under your father's full legal name, not his common name, and the property address is the survey marker, not a road address. How long before he figures it out? Willa looked at him steadily. Long enough, she said, if we move. Move how? The sealed envelope, she said. The one for the county clerk. I think it's time. That was the afternoon Eli finally found the key, not where he'd looked, not in the tin box, not buried in the garden, not hidden anywhere in the house. He'd searched all of those, systematically, with the patient, methodical thoroughness his father had taught him. You don't look where you think it is. You look everywhere. Then you find it. He found it on Copper. He'd been checking the dog's coat for burrs. Copper had gotten into something in the south brush and come back bristling, working through the fur with a wide-toothed comb he'd found in the kitchen cabinet. And when he got to the collar, the old leather collar, the one that had been on Copper since before Eli could remember, he felt something under the leather. Not a tag, a shape. He unbuckled the collar, turned it over. Stitched into the underside of the leather in a small pocket he hadn't known existed, barely a fold in the material closed with 3 tiny hand stitches, was a small brass key, same size as the padlock on the tin box. Eli sat on the floor. Copper looked at him. "He put it in your collar," Eli said. Copper tilted his head. "He put the key in your collar because he knew you'd come with me." He sat there for a moment, just sat, because there was nothing else to do with that, with the fact of it, with what it meant about his father, a man who had not known when or how things would fall apart, but had been certain they would, and had been certain that if they did, Eli would not be alone, would have the dog who knew the way. His throat was tight. He didn't fight it. He just sat on the floor of a house his father had built 37 years ago in a pine forest he'd never known about, with a key from a collar his father had stitched with his own hands and let it be what it was. The tin box opened on the first try. Eli set it on the kitchen table, turned the key, lifted the lid. Inside, a folded document, legal paper, the kind with the blue binding strip. He unfolded it carefully. Property deed, 40 acres, North Slope, Harlan County, Tennessee. Owner James Willard Harper. Signed, notarized, dated August 14th, 1987. Behind it, a second document, thinner, a letter on plain paper, handwritten, James's handwriting, and this one hurt to look at because it was clearly written when his father was already sick. The letters not as clean, the pen pressed harder than usual, the hand that had always been steady doing its best. He read it standing up, because he couldn't sit for this. "Eli, if you're reading this, then things went the way I was afraid they might, and you found your way out here, and Copper showed you the key, which means everything worked the way it was supposed to. I want to explain some things. I bought this land when I was 23, before your mother, before town, life before all of it. It was mine in a way that not many things are, not inherited, not given, not borrowed. I built that house with my hands over one summer, and it taught me more about what I was made of than anything before or since. I never told Darnell about it. That was a decision I made early and kept. You know your uncle. You know what he does with other people's things. The deed is legal. The will is filed in Knoxville with an attorney named Ruth Caswell on Magnolia Avenue. Her number is on the back of this page. She has instructions. Willa has a copy of everything. There's a sealed envelope in Willa's possession. Give it to the county clerk. They'll know what to do. I need you to hear this clearly. Eli, this land is yours, not because I say so, because the law says so, because I made sure of it. Your uncle is going to try to tell you different. He's going to use words like estate and probate and contested. Don't let those words scare you. Words aren't the same as truth. Use the documents. That's what they're for. He stopped reading, pressed the back of his hand to his mouth for a moment, then kept going. I want to say something that has nothing to do with land or law. I know the last few years were hard. I know I wasn't always present, even when I was in the room. The sickness takes things before it takes you, and one of the things it took was the easy version of me. But I want you to know that I thought about you when I was out here. Every September, I thought about who you were becoming and what you were going to need and what I could leave that would actually matter. Money runs out, advice gets forgotten, but land stays, a place where no one can tell you to leave. That's what I wanted to give you. I built that house before you were born, Eli. I didn't know it yet, but I was building it for you. Take care of the garden. The apple trees need pruning in February, your mother's birthday, so it's easy to remember. The spring runs clean, but check it after hard rains. Take care of Copper. Take care of yourself. I love you. I should have said it more often. I'm saying it now. Dad Eli folded the letter carefully, the same folds back into the same shape, put it back in the tin box, closed the lid, stood at the kitchen table for a long time with his hands flat on the wood and his eyes on the window where the pine forest stood dark and close and constant in the late afternoon light. Copper put his head against Eli's leg, not demanding anything, just there. Okay, Eli said finally. One word, but it held a lot. He was at Willa's door by the time the last light was leaving the ridge. She opened it before he knocked, read his face, said nothing for a moment. Then, coffee. The sealed envelope, he said. Can I have it? She went inside, came back with it, handed it over. He looked at it, still sealed, still addressed, Harlan County Property Office in his father's careful hand. Tomorrow, he said. I'll drive, Willa said. He was almost back through the east gate when he heard it. An engine from the direction of the south logging road. Low, getting closer, not a hunter's truck, wrong time of day, wrong speed, deliberate. He stopped. Copper stopped beside him. The engine cut. 2 doors. And then, from the south fence line, a voice. Darnell Harper's voice. Hello, anybody in there? Cheerful, loud, the voice of a man performing casualness for an audience he thinks can't read him. Eli stood at the east gate and did not move. Willa behind him said nothing. The second voice, someone else, male, unfamiliar, said something too low to hear. Darnell again. The property's under estate review. We're just doing a physical assessment. Eli turned to look at Willa. Willa's jaw was set. Her eyes said, Your call. Eli looked at the sealed envelope in his hand, then at the house, the smoke from the chimney, the repaired roof, the lit window where the lantern was burning, then at the south fence where Darnell Harper stood, with an unfamiliar man looking at a place that had never belonged to him, and Eli Harper, 16 years old son of James Harper, resident of this 40 acres of Tennessee pine forest, walked toward the south fence. Darnell saw him coming, and his face did something complicated. Surprise, then recalibration, then the jaw. Eli, flat, not a greeting. What are you doing out here? Living, Eli said. The man beside Darnell was in his 40s, clean jacket, clipboard, the expression of someone who has been in enough awkward property situations to have developed a professional blankness about them. This property is part of your father's estate, Darnell said, which means it's under review. You don't have the right to just... The property is registered to James Willard Harper, said a voice behind Eli. Willa Pruitt walked up beside him and stopped. She was holding nothing. She didn't need to. She looked at Darnell Harper the way a person looks at something small that is pretending to be large. I've held a copy of that deed for 34 years, she said, along with a will filed with an attorney in Knoxville that predates any estate claim you intend to make, and a sealed communication for the county property office that I imagine will be quite clarifying for everyone. The man with the clipboard looked at Darnell. Darnell looked at Willa. Willa looked back. The wind moved through the pines above all of them. You have no idea what you're involved in, Darnell said. Quiet now, the quiet of a man recalculating. Darnell, Willa said, I've known exactly what I was involved in since February of 2019. James made sure of that. Silence. The man with the clipboard said very quietly, Sir, maybe we should... We're leaving, Darnell said. He looked at Eli one more time. Something in that look, not anger exactly, something that recognized it had lost something it had been counting on, something that would need to find another angle, another approach. He turned. They walked back to the truck. The engine started, and they were gone. The pine forest settled back around the silence they left. Copper sat at Eli's feet and watched the logging road. Willa stood beside him, hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the place where the truck had been. He'll try again, Eli said. He'll try the legal route, Willa said, which is why we're going to the county office tomorrow morning. First things before they open, she said. We'll wait on the steps if we have to. Eli looked at the sealed envelope in his hand. He understood now what the "not yet" on the outside of the tin box had meant. Not ever. Not this isn't for you. Just wait until you have what you need. Wait until you're here. Wait until you're ready. He was here. He was ready. Thank you, he said, to Willa, but also, and he was aware of this and did not feel strange about it, to the pine forest, to the house, to the man who had built it. Willa looked at him. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Thank me after the paperwork." And she walked back toward the east gate, rubber boots steady on the cold ground, canvas jacket disappearing into the tree line. Copper leaned against Eli's leg. The envelope in his hand was light. The forest around him was not. It was full of everything his father had put into it all those years, all those Septembers, all those hours of unhurried work and deliberate preparation. 40 acres, a spring that ran clean, a garden that could be made to grow, an orchard already producing, and a house that had been waiting patiently, faithfully, without complaint for the person it had always been built for. Part 3. What Fathers Leave Behind. They were on the road before 7. Willa's truck was a 1998 Ford F-25. Oh, the color of old rust, with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked on the passenger side only, which Willa said built character. The back seat was occupied by 3 folded moving blankets, a toolbox, and a bag of chicken feed that had been there long enough to become furniture. Copper took up the entire passenger footwell and put his chin on Eli's knee. Eli held the manila envelope in both hands. Nobody spoke for the first 10 minutes. The logging road gave way to the county highway. The county highway ran east through bottomland bare cornfields, frost still on the ground, the sun just clearing the ridge behind them and throwing long shadows across everything. "You eaten?" Willa asked. Yes, he hadn't. She reached behind her without looking and produced a biscuit wrapped in wax paper and dropped it in his lap. "Don't lie to old women," she said. "We always know." He ate the biscuit. It was good. Buttermilk probably made from scratch. The kind of biscuit that tastes like someone got up early and meant it. "Did he ever talk about me?" Eli asked. Willa was quiet for a moment. "He talked about you the way people talk about things they're proud of but scared to ruin by saying too much," she said. "Careful, like the words might wear it out." Eli looked out the window. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That sounds like him." Harlan County was 40 minutes east. The county seat sat in a narrow river valley, the kind of town that had organized itself along one main street and never seen a reason to expand laterally. A courthouse with a Civil War cannon out front, a hardware store, a pharmacy, a diner, everything brick, everything settled, everything that shade of permanence that comes from a place which has been itself for a very long time and intends to keep on being it. Willa parked in front of the county building at 7:48. The door said 9 o'clock. "We wait," Willa said. "You said that last night." "I was right last night." They waited. Copper sat in the truck and watched them through the windshield with the patient, faintly judgmental expression of a dog who finds human bureaucracy mystifying but is willing to tolerate it. At 8:50, a woman in a gray coat arrived with keys. She saw Willa and stopped. "Willa Pruitt," she said, not surprised, more like of course. "Morning, Margaret," Willa said. "This is Eli Harper, James's boy." Margaret looked at Eli. Something moved through her face, recognition, or the shape of it, the way a person looks when they see something they know from an old photograph finally standing in front of them. "Lord," she said quietly, "you've got his eyes." And she unlocked the door. The county property office smelled like old paper and radiator heat. Margaret settled behind her desk and looked at the envelope Eli set in front of her, then at the deed, then at the second will, the one from the Knoxville attorney, Ruth Caswell, whose office Willa had called the night before and who had confirmed, in the measured language of someone who has been waiting for this call, that yes, the document was valid, yes, it was filed, yes, she could fax whatever was needed. Margaret read everything slowly. She was the kind of person who read things the way they were meant to be read, completely, without rushing, without performing attention. When she finished, she set the papers down and folded her hands on top of them. "The estate claim your uncle filed," she said carefully, assume sole inheritance based on intestate succession, which would apply if your father died without a valid will. But he had one, Eli said. He had one, Margaret agreed, filed in Knox County, which creates a conflict that has to be resolved, but the resolution is not complicated given the documentation. How long? Weeks, not months. She looked at the sealed envelope. May I? Eli nodded. She opened it carefully, read it, and something shifted in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but the satisfaction of a thing clicking into place that was always going to click into place, just waiting for the right moment. Your father filed a protective declaration in 2019, she said, asserting that any estate claim against this property by Darnell Wayne Harper would constitute fraudulent misrepresentation of heirship. Silence. He knew, Eli said. He prepared, Margaret said. There's a difference. He prepared for what he knew was possible. She looked at him steadily. This land is yours, Mr. Harper. That's not going to change. They were outside by 10:15. The sun was up properly now. The frost had burned off the sidewalk. The air had that October clarity, sharp enough to see every detail of everything. The grain in the wooden courthouse door, the individual leaves still hanging in the maple across the street, the exhale of breath becoming visible and then gone. Eli stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets. He didn't feel what he thought he'd feel. He'd expected something large, some flood of relief or triumph, or grief, or all three arriving at once, something cinematic. What he felt instead was quiet, like a room after a long argument, after the voices stop and the air settles and what's left is just the room, just itself again. You okay? Willa asked. Yeah. You sure? I think so. She looked at him. Good, she said, because we're not done. Ruth Caswell's office was on Magnolia Avenue in Knoxville, which was 90 minutes west. Eli had not known they were going there. You could have mentioned this, he said when Willa got on the interstate. You would have worried about it all morning. I would have prepared. You don't need to prepare, Willa said. You just need to show up. That's all you've ever needed to do. He thought about that for a while. Copper rearranged himself in the footwell and put his chin on Eli's knee and sighed. The long sigh of a dog in a moving vehicle, profound contentment disguised as mild complaint. He planned every piece of this, Eli said. The land, the deed, the attorney, the declaration, the tin box, the key. A pause. How long was he planning it? Willa was quiet for a moment, watching the road. I think he started when you were born, she said. I think you being born made him understand what he was holding and what he needed to do to keep it safe for you. He never said any of this. No. Why not? Willa considered. Because saying it would have meant talking about what he was afraid of, she said. And your daddy wasn't built for that kind of talking. He was built for doing. Some men love out loud. Your father loved by preparing. Outside, the interstate rolled west through the plateau country. November brown fields, rock cuts showing the layered limestone of the Cumberland, the sky high and pale and enormous above the valley. Eli watched it go past. I'm angry at him, he said, surprised by his own voice saying it. I know. He should have told me. Yes. He had time. Before the end, he had time. Yes, Willa said again. Simple. Not defending, not explaining, just yes. You're right, that's true. And it's also true that he loved you. And both things can be true at the same time without either one canceling the other. She didn't say all of that. She didn't need to. Eli pressed his forehead against the cold window glass and watched Tennessee go past. Ruth Caswell was 64 years old, small, precise, the kind of attorney who wore her experience lightly, but you could feel it in every sentence, the exact word chosen, the exact amount of information, given nothing extra, nothing missing. Her office was on the second floor. Dark wood, law books, a photograph on the desk of two golden retrievers, younger than Copper, both of them completely ridiculous looking in the way only young Goldens can be. She looked at Copper when they came in. "Golden," she said. "Copper," Eli said. "I know," she said. James described him, said he was the color of a new penny. She shook Eli's hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked at his face with the calm attention of someone taking a measurement. "You look like him," she said, "around the eyes." "People keep saying that." "It's a good thing to look like," she said simply, and moved on. She walked him through everything. The will, the real one filed in Knox County in 2019, the same February. James had brought documents to Willa. The same February, he'd sewn the key into Copper's collar. All of it on the same day. His father had driven to Knoxville to Harlan to Willa's porch. One day, all of it, 40 acres, a house, a son who didn't know yet. The estate claim your uncle filed is based on a document your father signed in 2021, Ruth said, a general power of attorney that Darnell Harper presented for your father's signature during a period when your father was undergoing chemotherapy. Eli looked at her. He was sick in 2021. Yes. Did he know what he was signing? Ruth Caswell looked at him steadily. That, she said, is precisely the question, and it is precisely what I intend to argue, because a general power of attorney signed by a person under cognitive impairment from chemotherapy without independent legal counsel present is challengeable, and because your father fortunately had a physician who documented his mental state at every appointment. That physician has agreed to provide records. The room was very quiet. My father knew, Eli said slowly. He knew Darnell would try something, even then, even after 2019 when he'd already prepared everything. I believe he knew it was possible, Ruth said. The 2021 document was likely presented to him during a period when he was too ill to resist clearly, but he had the foresight in 2019 to create a paper trail that would answer exactly this kind of challenge. He was thinking 3 steps ahead even then. She slid a folder across the desk. This is the filing I'll make with the probate court, contesting the power of attorney on grounds of undue influence and cognitive impairment at time of signing. Given the documentation, the prior will, the property declaration, the deed, I expect this to be resolved in your favor without going to full hearing. How long? 6 to 8 weeks. And until then, she said, you stay on that property, you maintain it, you give no one permission to enter or assess. And if Darnell Harper or anyone acting on his behalf attempts to interfere with your residence, you call me. She handed him a card. Any time, she said, day or night. They drove back east in the early afternoon. Eli held the folder in his lap, the documents his father had built, quietly, over years, against the possibility of exactly this. What happens to Darnell, he asked. That depends on what the court finds, Willa said. If the power of attorney is found to have been obtained under undue influence, there are consequences. Your father's estate attorney has already flagged certain financial transactions that occurred under that document. He took money. Some. The attorney is handling that separately. Eli was quiet for a long time. I'm not trying to destroy him, he said finally. I know. I just want him to stop. That's what the law is for, Willa said. Not destroying, stopping. Copper shifted, put both paws on Eli's knee, which he was not supposed to do and which Eli did not correct, because sometimes you need the full weight of a dog on you. Sometimes that is exactly what the moment requires and nothing else will do. November arrived the way it does in the mountains, not gradually. Just one morning you woke up and the season had changed in the night without asking anyone's permission. The first real snow came on November 3rd, 6 inches overnight, which in that part of Tennessee was enough to make the pine forest look like a different place entirely. White, hushed, every branch outlined, every sound absorbed into the cold. Eli stood on the porch in the early morning and watched it. Copper pushed past him and waded into the yard with the unbridled enthusiasm of a dog experiencing deep snow for what was clearly, in his opinion, the greatest event in recent memory. He stuck his face in it, came up sneezing, did it again, did it a third time, absolutely delighted with himself. Eli almost laughed. Almost. He was still carrying things that made laughing complicated, the anger at his father which was real and which he decided not to bury. The grief which was different from the anger ran deeper and came without warning, usually in the evenings when the fire was low and the house was quiet and there was no task left to do, and all he had was the silence and the shelf with the tin box on it. He'd read the letter 6 times now. Each time he stood at the kitchen table and unfolded it and read it from the beginning and felt the full weight of it settle on him, not crushing, not comfortable, just real, just the thing it was, a man trying to say what he didn't know how to say out loud, saying it in wood and stone and legal documents and a key sewn into a collar, saying it the only way he knew. Willa came that afternoon with firewood. She had a half cord in the back of the F250, and she started unloading it with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been handling firewood longer than most people have been alive. Eli took one look at her and came off the porch and started stacking without being asked. They worked in the snow, side by side, not talking. That was something he'd figured out about Willa Pruitt in the weeks since she'd appeared at the fence. She didn't feel silence. She let it be what it was. Most adults he'd known couldn't do that. They filled, they explained, they offered comfort before you'd had time to find out whether you needed it. Willa let silence work. He liked that about her more than almost anything else. When the last of the wood was stacked under the porch overhang, protected dry enough for at least 4 weeks, she dusted her gloves on her jacket and looked at the house. "The garden's going to need work come March," she said. "I know. I've got seeds if you want them. Put them up last summer. Tomatoes, beans, squash, some kale. I'll want them." She looked at him. "You're planning to stay," she said. Not a question. "It's my land," he said. "It is." A beat. "There's more to it than that, though." He leaned on the stacked firewood, looked at the house, the smoke from the chimney, the snow on the repaired roof, holding fine, no leakage, not a drip. "I feel like he's here," Eli said. "Not in a strange way, just he's in the walls, in the way the shelves are built, the way the stove drawer works. Like he's still explaining things. Like every time I figure something out about this place, I can almost hear him saying, 'Yeah, that's right.'" Willa was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't go away," she said. "I've been on my land 43 years and my husband's still in the woodwork. Literally. He built the porch himself and he always notched the rails at an angle nobody else would have thought of. Stronger joint, but also just his way of doing it." She looked somewhere past the tree line. "Every spring when I resurface that porch, I think there's Earl being clever again." Eli looked at her. She looked back. "It's not a bad way to keep someone," she said. The letter came 6 weeks later. December. Ground frozen solid. The garden beds covered in a foot of snow. The apple trees bare and black against the white of the slope, their branches making the particular pattern that bare trees make against winter sky, not dead-looking, just waiting, just knowing something about spring that the rest of the world has temporarily forgotten. Ruth Caswell's office. Return address on the envelope. Eli opened it at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he put it down flat on the table and stood up and walked outside onto the porch in the December cold without his jacket. Copper followed, sat beside him. The probate court had ruled. The power of attorney, the document Darnell Harper had obtained in 2021, had been found invalid. Grounds evidence of undue influence, evidence of cognitive impairment at time of signing, documented by James Harper's oncologist in records obtained by Ruth Caswell's office. The estate of James Willard Harper was to be administered according to the will filed in Knox County in 2019, which left everything to Eli James Harper. The house in town, the one Darnell had locked and changed the locks on, the savings account, the truck, the personal property, and 40 acres of Tennessee pine forest, registered, legal, his. Okay, Eli said, to nobody, to everything, to the pine trees and the frozen ground and the smoke coming from the chimney and the spring running clean under the ice and the apple trees that would bloom again in April, whether anyone tended them or not. Okay. Copper pressed himself against Eli's leg. He called Willa. She answered on the second ring. It came, he said, a pause on her end, and we won. The pause stretched, and in it, in that silence on that line between this boy and this woman in two houses at the edge of a pine forest in Tennessee, something moved, something that had been held tightly for a very long time and was now finally allowed to loosen. James, Willa said quietly, not to Eli, to someone else entirely, you stubborn man. Then to Eli, come for dinner. You don't have to. Come for dinner, she said again, firmly. The way you say something when you mean it and don't need to say it twice except that you will. She made soup, the real kind, not from a can, not from a packet, from actual vegetables and actual bones and actual time. The kitchen was warm. The windows had gone foggy with it. There was cornbread in a cast iron skillet on the stove, the kind with the crisp bottom, the kind Eli's mother used to make on Sundays before she got sick. He didn't say that, but he thought it. They sat at her kitchen table. Copper lay beside the wood stove in the corner, which Willa had covered with an old blanket for him without comment, like it was always his spot, like he'd always been welcome here. Maybe he had. Maybe his father had brought him here. Every September. What happens now, Eli asked, with Darnell? Ruth says there's a separate civil matter regarding the financial transactions. That'll take time. But the land is settled. The land is settled. He ate, looked at the grain of the table. He should have told me, he said, not for the first time, but saying it again because some things need to be said more than once before they stop needing to be said. Yes, Willa said, I keep coming back to that. That's grief, she said. Grief and anger look a lot alike. Sometimes they're the same thing wearing different clothes. He looked at her. You lost someone, he said. Not a question. My husband, 21 years ago. She picked up her spoon. Earl Pruitt died on a Tuesday doing exactly what he wanted to be doing, which was pulling fence posts in the back 40, dropped. Just like that. A pause. I was angry at him for years. For dying without saying the things he should have said. She looked at the window fogged orange, with kitchen light the night pressing dark against the other side. Then one spring I was resurfacing the porch, and I got to that notched rail, and I thought he said it. He just said it like this, in the wood, in the work, in the angle of a joint that nobody else would have bothered with. Silence. The stove ticked. Copper shifted on his blanket. Your father said it to you too, Willa said. You know that. Eli nodded. He did know. It didn't fix the anger, didn't fill the specific absence that was shaped exactly like James Harper drinking coffee at a kitchen table with his glasses pushed too far down his nose. But he knew. He walked home in the dark. Through the east gate, his gate now legally, formally, finally, down the path to the house. The chimney smoke visible against the stars, which were clear and cold and packed tight in the December sky, the way they only get when the air is dry and the temperature is dropping and there's nothing between you and space but a thin column of atmosphere. He stood on the porch for a long while, looked up. Copper sat beside him, pressed close. He thought about his father at 23, driving out to this ridge, with tools and timber and a specific idea about what he wanted to build, not knowing yet about Eli's mother, not knowing about Eli, building something he couldn't fully name yet, the need for it more certain than the reason. Then going home, coming back every September, sitting maybe on this porch in the dark, looking at these same stars, thinking about whatever men think about when they sit in the dark, in the middle of something they built with their own hands and know they won't be there to see finish. Maybe thinking about a son he didn't have yet. Maybe thinking someday if things go wrong, if the world does what worlds sometimes do, there will be this place, this door, this ground. He'll be okay. I'll make sure of it. The letter was still on the kitchen table when he came inside. He picked it up, read the operative paragraph one more time to be administered according to the will filed in Knox County, the property at North Slope, Harlan County, Tennessee, comprising 40 acres, more or less to pass in fee simple, to Eli James Harper, sole heir. He folded it, put it in the tin box, with his father's letter, both of them together now, the preparation and the result, the plan and the proof that it worked. He closed the lid, set it back on the shelf. January, February. He pruned the apple trees on his mother's birthday the way the letter had said. He didn't know much about pruning. He knew the principle: cut back to open the center, let the light in, remove what's dead, so the living has room to grow. His father had written 3 sentences about it in the letter. He read them 4 times before he started. He made mistakes, cut one branch shorter than he should have, left another one he should have taken, but the trees were pruned and they were still standing, and he'd do better next year because he'd done it this year. That was the thing about working a piece of land. Every season taught you something the last season couldn't. You couldn't learn it from a book or from someone else's description. You had to do it wrong first, then right, then better. His father had understood that, had built a place where Eli could learn those things in the order they needed to be learned. In April, when the dogwood bloomed in the bottomland and the redbuds came out on the south slope and the world turned green in that specific way that green only happens after a long, cold winter, the apple trees bloomed. All of them, white flowers, dozens per branch, the whole orchard humming with bees that had found their way there from somewhere in the warming hillside, doing the work bees do the work that makes everything else possible. Eli stood in the middle of the orchard. Copper waded through the tall grass at the orchard's edge, chasing something invisible tail streaming behind him like a flag. The petals were falling, already barely open, barely there, and already letting go. The wind took them up the slope toward the house, small white pieces of something beautiful and brief, moving through the April air toward the gray timber walls, the patched roof, the chimney that had smoke rising from it every morning now. Eli watched them go. Willa brought the seeds in March. Tomatoes, beans, squash, kale, and also, without mentioning it, a flat of strawberry starts wrapped in damp burlap that she said she'd had going since fall and had absolutely no room for, which was almost certainly not true, and which both of them understood without discussing it. They planted on a Tuesday, side by side, down the old rows James Harper had cut into the hillside soil. Willa showed him the spacing for tomatoes. He showed her how his father had done the beans, running them on stakes rather than poles, a Harlan County method she'd never seen. Interesting, she said. He learned it from his mother. I never knew his mother. She was from here, moved away young, came back eventually. Willa pressed a stake into the ground. Roots always find their way back. Eli looked at the house, at the garden they were planting, at the 40 acres of pine forest, stretching north and west, and up the ridge, standing the way it had stood before any of them were born and would stand after. Yeah, he said. It took him until May. He'd been thinking about it since December, since the night he'd stood on the porch, looking at the stars, and understood something about what his father had left him that went beyond the legal description of 40 acres more or less, North Slope, Harlan County. He borrowed Willa's truck on a Saturday morning. She handed him the keys without asking why, which was one of the things about Willa. He'd come to depend on that practical trust that didn't require explanation or justification or a detailed accounting of your intentions. He drove to the town of Kellam, west on the county highway through the bottomland, past the Dollar General and the diner and the 3 churches. He drove to the cemetery on the west side of town. The grass was already long in May. The dogwoods past bloom here, leaves coming in full and green. The stones in their rows, some old, some new, all of them keeping the same patient silence. His father's stone was new, clean granite, James Willard Harper. The dates, a simple stone his mother had chosen it before she got sick, and she'd chosen right. Eli stood in front of it. Copper sat beside him. He didn't have anything prepared to say, which was, he thought, probably appropriate. His father had never been a man for prepared speeches. He'd been a man for doing things, for showing up, for building, for leaving. So Eli just said what was true. "I'm angry at you," he said. "I think I'll be angry for a while. That's okay. You can handle it." Wind moved through the dogwood above him. "The roof is fixed. The left side rafter, I sistered a new piece alongside it. Screws, not nails. It's solid. You were right to leave the cedar for it." Copper lay down in the grass, chin on his paws, patient. "I pruned the apple trees on Mom's birthday, like you said. I made some mistakes. They bloomed anyway. The whole orchard. You should have seen it." A robin landed on a stone 2 rows over, looked at them with that sideways bird attention, flew away. "Willa is good. You chose well there. She doesn't feel silence. I like that about her. She's teaching me things you didn't get to. She says you were always late." He stopped, looked at the stone for a long time. "I built that house before you were born," he quoted. "I just didn't know yet who I was building it for." He was quiet. "I know," he said finally. "Dad, I know." He drove back east. The valley road, the county highway, the logging road slow and careful in the truck, the spring mud soft at the edges, giving slightly under the tires and then holding, and then the clearing, and the house. Smoke from the chimney. He'd banked the fire low before leaving, and it had held. The garden visible through the south fence, the new growth just showing green above the soil. Beans coming up, tomatoes staked, the strawberries start settling in, sending out their first runners. The apple trees on the slope in full leaf now, the spring running clean, the 40 acres quiet around all of it. His. He sat in the truck for a moment, just looking at it. The thing his father had built before he existed, the thing his father had kept for him patiently, faithfully, through all those years of September visits and renewed arrangements and documents filed in offices an hour's drive away, all of it pointing here, all of it pointing at this, the place where no one could tell him to leave. Copper was at the truck door before Eli had the handle turned. He led him out, watched him run full speed, ears back tail, streaming straight for the south fence line and around the corner of the house and into the garden, where he stopped and buried his nose in the green bean seedlings and came up sneezing and deeply satisfied. Eli got out of the truck, stood in the clearing. The pines moved in the May wind above him, a sound like breathing, like the forest settling its weight, like something very old and very patient that has been doing what it does for centuries and will continue doing it long after any of us are here to hear it. His father was in the walls, in the way the shelves were built and the stove drew and the garden rows still ran straight after 37 years, in the 40 acres that had waited, in the key sewn into a collar by hands that knew they were running out of time and did what they could with what they had. In the words, "I love you." I should have said it more often. I'm saying it now. He thought about what Willa had said about Earl, about the notched rail, about the way a person says things in the work they leave behind, in the choices they make, and the angles they cut, and the care they put into something that they know will outlast them. His father had said everything, just not in words, in 40 acres of North Slope, Tennessee pine forest, in a house built in 1987 by a 23-year-old man who didn't know yet who he was building it for, in a key sewn into a dog's collar, in 3 sentences about pruning apple trees in February, in Take Care of Copper, Take Care of Yourself, all of it said, all of it left. Eli Harper put his hands in his jacket pockets, looked at the chimney smoke rising straight in the still May air, walked toward the porch. The boards held under his boots the 2 he'd replaced in March solid and the original 3 older than he was still good. The door opened the way it always had, shoulder, not hand, because the latch was stiff, and his father had never gotten around to fixing it, and Eli hadn't either, and maybe he wouldn't, because there were some things about a place that were themselves, that didn't need to be fixed, that were just the way they were, and the way they had always been, and that was enough. More than enough. Inside the stove was warm. The tin box was on the shelf. The shelf his father had built level and plumb the way his father built everything. And outside, through the south window, the garden was green and new and growing, and the orchard was in full leaf, and the spring was running clean, and the pines on the ridge were moving in the May wind, and Copper was somewhere in the garden, sneezing at bean seedlings, and the smoke from the chimney was rising into the blue Tennessee sky, and it was enough. It was his, and it was home.